Hello, my name is Cheryl Zhang, and I'm an HR business partner here with EESI. You are attending EESI's webinar series, which the EESI webinar series is a new initiative we're providing free of charge to our clients. This is going to help provide educational material on HR-related topics such as payroll, benefits, risk, and HR. It's going to help you avoid compliance pitfalls. We're also going to explain some of EESI's processes so you can streamline your daily tasks and then answer your questions. This presentation is scheduled for 30 minutes, and we've allowed time for questions and answers at the end. We will be recording the session so that we can publish it on our YouTube channel for future access, and afterward, we'll provide PowerPoint presentation for your reference. At this time, I will turn things over to our presenters.
Thank you, Cheryl, and good morning, and welcome to today's webinar on background check best practices. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. Today, we'll be discussing the best practices when conducting background checks. We will also discuss why background checks are so important, talk about Ban the Box and why it's important for our clients to be aware of this, and finally discuss social media and what employers need to know. My name is Miranda Wooten. I'm an HR business partner. I've been with EESI for just over a year now, and I am located in Denver, Colorado. Also joining us today is Iris Bain. She's an HR coordinator. She's been with EESI for almost 4 years, and she is in the San Antonio, Texas office. Everyone will be muted during the presentation. However, please feel free to submit questions via the chat box in GoToMeeting, and we will address these questions at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. First, we will talk about best practices when conducting background checks. When conducting background checks, remember, you must wait until after you have extended an offer and the candidate has accepted the position before you can start the background screening process. Keep in mind that background checks can take up to a week to process, and it is best practice to complete the background check prior to the employee starting. This is important because you don't want to go through the whole onboarding process, new hire paperwork, reviewing the handbook, and then have to turn around and terminate the employee based off of what you find on their background report. When conducting background checks, make sure you're using a consumer reporting agency, a CRA. On the screen are some examples: ARCO, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. You must give your applicant written notice when you're requiring a background check. So some examples of this would be to include it in the offer letter to the candidate or on the job posting. Your applicant also needs to sign an authorization form before you can start the background check, authorizing the background check to be processed. Consistency is key. Remember, you must be consistent when conducting background checks. Perform the same background check for all candidates in the same or similar positions. The EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has provided some guidance for employers to use when reviewing background checks. So the 3 factors they would like you to consider are gravity, time, and job position. So for gravity, was the offense a misdemeanor versus a felony? Was there a fine versus probation versus imprisonment? And time. How long ago did the offense take place? How old was the applicant when this offense took place? And finally, job position. So for example, are you hiring someone who will be handling money, such as an accountant? will this applicant have access to customers' homes, or will they be supervised in the office? Will the candidate be driving a company vehicle or potentially dealing with children? So these are some different things that you need to think of as you're reviewing background checks and try to figure out what would apply for these positions. Some additional factors to consider are state-specific FCRA laws. So the Fair Credit Reporting Act is a federal government legislation enacted to promote the accuracy, fairness, and privacy of consumer information. So today we're going to focus on Colorado and Texas, and the reason for that is most of our clients are based in those two states. We're more than happy to look into other states as well. So let's start with Colorado. So in the state of Colorado, you cannot look back more than 7 years unless the salary is expected to equal $75,000 or more. Then the 7-year look back does not apply. Texas as well has the fact that you cannot look back more than 7 years unless the salary is expected to equal $75,000 or more, then the 7-year restriction does not apply, as well as the credit reporting agency can only provide the report if it's used for employment purposes. So after taking the above factors into account, if you still decide to take adverse action against the candidate, and this means you decide to not move forward with the candidate based on the information found in their background, then you need to begin the process with sending a pre-adverse action letter, a copy of their background report, and a summary of their rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Here is a sample of a pre-adverse action letter. As you can see, it states you have the right to dispute the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in the report, and then it lists the background screening company that was used. Once you have sent the pre-adverse action letter to the candidate, then you need to allow a reasonable amount of time for them to clear up any inaccuracies found on their report. The employer must wait the 5 to 10 business days before making a hiring decision. An employer may choose to wait until the dispute is over, but there are no requirements in the FCRA to hold a job open for a long period of time. After you've sent the candidate the pre-adverse action letter, and you've given the candidate a reasonable amount of time, so the 5 to 10 business days, then you can move forward with the adverse action letter, which lets the candidate know that they are not selected for the position based in part on the information found in the report. So here's an example of an adverse action letter. As you can see, it states, the reason for our decisions were based in part on information obtained from the consumer reporting agency identified below. So we wanted to put together this flow chart to talk through what we just discussed in the previous slides. So right there in the middle, it talks about the applicant signing the acknowledgement, authorization, and release form. As a reminder, background checks can take up to a week to process. So as the employer, you're going to review the background check using the EEOC Guidance, gravity, time, and job position. So on the left-hand side, if the report returns adverse information resulting in an adverse hiring decision, then you follow the 3-step process. Step 1, adverse action letter. Send the adverse action letter, or the pre-adverse action letter, copy of the report, and summary of rights under the FCRA. Step 2, you allow the applicant 5 to 10 business days to clear up any inaccuracies found on their report. And then finally, step 3, you send the adverse action letter. Over on the right-hand side, if no adverse information was returned in the report, then you can move forward with hiring the employee or the applicant. Confidentiality. Remember to maintain confidentiality of all information obtained during the background screening process. So what does this mean? Who has access to this information? We recommend only sharing the information obtained in the background check with individuals that need to know. So hiring managers don't need to know the exact findings on the background check. Also make sure to keep this information in a secured location. So this goes for all employee information, not just background checks. So make sure it's stored in either online in a secured location or in a safe, secured filing cabinet that only certain people have access to. So why are background checks so important? As an employer, it is your responsibility to protect your employees, customers, clients, and the bottom line of the company. Background checks help prevent you from making bad hires and hiring individuals who will harm your workforce or customers or even potentially steal from the company. To illustrate this, we have some case studies to share. So this first case study involves a company who improperly screened a candidate, and this employee had access to a company vehicle. He was involved in a car accident, which unfortunately resulted in 2 deaths. This accident occurred during non-work hours and while business was not being conducted. However, he was in the company vehicle. So this case was settled, and I think what's interesting, what is important about this case is the fact that even though the employee was not doing business and was not doing business hours, the company was still held liable for this. The second case involved an unscreened applicant who was hired by a health club. He was provided keys to the club. The same day that he was hired, he went out to a local bar, befriended 2 young ladies, invited them back to the club to go into the jacuzzi. They did both go back to the club willingly. The defendant then escorted one of the women up to an upstairs locker room where he sexually assaulted her. So this was settled in less than 2 hours and settled for $180,000. So what I think is important about this case is the fact that it was settled in 2 hours. So which to me is telling me that whatever was on this individual's background could have shown a behavior that could have prevented this incident from happening. And I think that's why it settled so quickly and why the company was held liable. So now I'm going to turn it over to Iris, and she'll talk through Ban the Box.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to spend a few minutes to talk about Ban the Box and why it's important to you as an employer. So let's get started. What is Ban the Box, and why are we talking about it? Some of you may have already started hearing this phrase, but are not quite sure what it means. Ban the Box is certainly trending in the HR world due to over 150 cities and counties adopting it nationwide. Ban the Box was created by civil rights groups and social advocates. The purpose for Ban the Box is for employers to give applicants a fair chance when applying by removing the conviction question entirely from applications. This would allow fair decision-making during the screening process. It's important to focus on an applicant's skill set and not their past during the screening process. Not only is this best practice, it will also help with possible discrimination allegations. We have all seen the conviction question on applications. Have you ever been convicted of a crime or felony? Case studies show once employers notice the conviction question is answered with a yes, the applicants are no longer considered leading candidates. So, how exactly does this question impact you as an employer? All affected areas should remove the criminal history question from their applications and not discussed during the interview. Box legislation does not require an employer to hire any candidate with a criminal background, and best practice is for employers to still conduct background checks on their applicants. Ban the Box simply pushes the question later in the hiring process. Once the employer reaches the interview stage and has extended a conditional offer, should this be addressed? At this time, Ban the Box is not specific to a particular region. It's a nationwide trend that must be looked at closely. As you may have noticed, its compliance is not necessarily mandated by an entire state, but also is not limited to by cities and counties. As our employee base is mainly in Colorado and Texas, we have focused on those two regions for this presentation. If you would like to know more specifically of your employee workforce, please email me after the presentation. In the state of Colorado, only public employees are affected. At this time, Austin is the first and only city in Texas that has enforced this ordinance. However, we expect more to quickly follow. Employers with Austin's Ban the Box enforcement must have at least 15 employees whose primary location is in Austin. Other sectors may have different specifics for this ordinance. Having a background check policy in place is not only a great way to avoid negligence in your hiring process, it's also a good way to screen your candidates and reveal dishonesty and/or red flags that may need to be addressed. Remember, this should only happen once an offer has been made and a consent form has been signed by the applicant, allowing a consumer reporting agency to conduct research on their past. Protect your company by knowing the law. Violation of this ordinance may result in fines and penalties. As EESI becomes aware of new regulations, we are happy to share information via our client intel newsletter. It is important to be familiar with local regulations to ensure compliance. And finally, I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing background checks and social media. It seems as though we're surrounded by daily tweets, likes, pokes, and hashtags. The internet has given inquisitive employers the ease of tapping into the world of a potential employee with a simple Google search. The question is, just how much prying is interfering with privacy? It's important to have a policy in place and understand the risk when conducting social media searches. Remember to keep your findings private and make sure you're being consistent if you choose to search applicants. Best practice is to assign someone within the company to review the content. Ensure the designated employee keeps protected categories such as religious beliefs, race, or national origin information private. The search should only be used to verify information such as where the applicant attended college or previous employment. Don't go out of your way to friend request someone. Look for outliers and make sure your hiring decision is justifiable. Reminder, these searches should only be conducted after the initial interview, and the applicant should never be coerced into sharing access to their social media. Your hiring decision should be legitimate and not be influenced by public online content. For example, the search reveals an applicant volunteering and helping the community, versus a person spending a lot of time at happy hour. You may now have a biased stigma of this person's personal choices. Again, keep in mind protected classes. Your search may reveal a person's nationality and or a medical situation they may be dealing with. You decide not to move forward with the applicant. That person could now argue the reason you passed them up was due to what you saw on their social media accounts. You have now opened yourself up for a potential discrimination suit. There are numerous lawsuits involving social media. In the case of Gaskell versus the University of Kentucky, the applicant was considered a leading candidate and was qualified for the job. He was eventually told he did not get hired for the position. Mr. Gaskell filed a discrimination suit against the university, alleging that he was not hired due to his religious views. It was later discovered that an email correspondence amongst the committee had surfaced regarding Mr. Gaskell's public statement about his views on evolution and the Bible found on his personal website. The university claimed that they did not hire Mr. Gaskell as they felt he may violate company policy by representing his own opinions. The case settled for $125,000. A statement by the university was released indicating the settlement was not an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Social media is not going away. Therefore, employers who decide to browse their applicants' social media accounts must remember this should be handled in a consistent and lawful manner, and most importantly, use good judgment on their next steps in the screening and hiring process. As HR professionals, we can't stress enough the importance of running background checks to avoid negligent hiring. We hope the information shared with you today has been helpful for background checks best practices. If you're currently working with a qualified company for your background check needs, we are glad to hear that you're avoiding any negligent hiring. EESI has partnered with a leading background check service company, and the relationship brings the best qualified and skilled professionals to ensure compliance and accuracy. Services include a multi-jurisdictional search on over 5,000 live databases, reporting misdemeanors and felonies. All reports include research on the National Sex Offender Registry, as well as the terrorist and FBI watch list. If you're interested in learning more about our services, we would be happy to discuss a customizable package that best fits your needs. We hope today's presentation has been informative and look forward to working with you and providing guidance on the topics we've discussed today. We will now allow a few minutes to answer any questions submitted via the chat box. If you prefer to contact us via email, feel free to send your inquiry to hr@eesipeo.com or backgroundchecks@eesipeo.com. You may also reach us toll-free at 1-888-465-1171.
Thank you, Iris, and thank you, Miranda, as well. At this time, we do have a couple questions from our participants, and if you have any others, feel free to add them. Okay, question 1. Do I have to run background checks on everyone at my company? This is a great question. Generally, no. There are some industries that have legal requirements, healthcare licensing, drivers who are covered under the Department of Transportation, and education are a few examples. But for most employers, you would just need to face it like like Miranda had said earlier, you want to look at your positions. You can create different categories, some that have background checks and some that don't. For example, if you're a bank, then maybe your bank maintenance staff does not need a background check, whereas your tellers would. So think about it that way, and just in general, what you also want to do is once you've determined those categories, you've worked with an HR professional to make sure you're compliant, then everybody in that specific category, make sure you're consistent in running a background check for everyone in that category. Okay, good question. Let's see. The next one, can I hire someone once there is a finding on our lead candidate? Iris, do you want to take that one?
I'll answer that, Cheryl. Thank you. That's a good question. Remember, best practice is to remember that we must allow the applicant to dispute any inaccuracies that may have been found on the report. 5 to 10 business days is a reasonable amount of time to allow anything that may need to be addressed with the CRA that ran the background check on the applicant. Until the time frame has expired, we may need to hold off on moving forward with another candidate, and that's just best practice for this type of situation.
Okay, thank you. We did have another question. I have a property management company with special populations in apartment buildings, and I have to have employees that have passed a background check even though I'm in Austin. So I have to ask that question on the application. Is that okay? Great question. So in that case, if you have more than 15 employees, and for different cities or different states, it may be different for your location. But in Austin, we know it's 15 employees within the city. So if as an employer you meet that requirement, then you would have to remove that from your application. And like we stated earlier, I know Miranda mentioned, this does not mean you have to hire that person. It means you have to move it later in the process. So to answer the question, yes, you would have to take the criminal history question off your application. Do not discuss it during the interview process. And then once you've narrowed down to a candidate that you have made an offer to, at that point we start the process, just like the flow chart earlier in the presentation, to determine if they meet the background requirements of your industry and of your company. Okay, looks like those are all the questions we have right now. Again, please feel free to email us or call us if you have more specific questions. We want to thank everybody for attending today and look forward to having you at our next webinar. Have a great week.